Now everyone has says to Arjuna that you haven't got to
morning then that
I can do I would launch meeting then Zoom. Download from Zoom.
why yeah different?
Do you want to download Zoom? Download. Hey,
Oh, you don't have it.
Oh, what video है? Good life, okay.
Your video is on, Prabhu.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, you can switch on the video if you want, no issue.
Off already.
Downloading. Oh, open now. Open now. Huh? The phone is not allowed to refer unknown as computer. Kính chừng. Con.
How to use that? Lớp 7.
What is all this one? I'm not getting that. What is asking? Put on your TV lah. Ask you to off the machine. What's going on? Can hear.
Recording.
Oh.
Joe, how to mute? Prabhu telling I didn't mute.
Eleven participants are already there. Sorry, I had a late lunch. What is lunch today? Chinese, you want to start it?
No, that is.
What do you have for lunch? I had some cheese sabji. Oh, Krishna, look at this. Hare Krishna, good afternoon to those of you who are in India and nearby, and good morning or evening to those of you who are in different other parts of the world. It's been a chilly, wet Mayapur afternoon today. It's been raining since morning, not raining, like drizzling. Okay, so let's get going. I'll offer prayers and then we'll start. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Caitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadam Ahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Tams Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Jayapataka Swamniti Namine Nama Acharya Padaya Nitaikrapa Pradayane Gaurakata Dhamadaya Nagragram Tarine Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Gopi Paranadana Saiti Namine Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamniti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Adeshtarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya evacha Paritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Giramitриpatamaham Bande Shri Guru Tripatamaham Bande Paramananda Madhav Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Katanchana Smrite Yasmin Dushkaram Sukaram Bhaveta Smrite Vipritam Syat Shri Chaitanyam Namamitam. Okay, and then share.
Which one?
This.
But where is the?
It's already screen is selected.
Select. I don't see it.
And you go here.
Where? This is screen is being shared now.
Yeah.
Can you just check with us?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so in last session, we ended with Prabhupada's grand opening of the League of Devotees in Jhansi. This was in the May, in the month of May, 1953. Almost simultaneously, as he opened the
Jhansi League of Devotees. His business in Allahabad also collapsed. If you remember, Prabhupada first came to Jhansi in October of 1952 on a business visit, and he liked Jhansi. He got an invitation from the Gita Samaj and other places, other members like Shastri, Dr. Shastri, who was very interested in Prabhupada's vision of an international organization to spread Krishna consciousness, international, at least the international scope of his vision. And so he came in November of 1952 to explore the possibilities. And finally, in May of 1953, he established the League of Devotees. He opened the League of Devotees Center, which was the Bharati Bhavan or the Radha Memorial in Jhansi. So from November onwards till May, that's about almost a little over 6 months, he was in Jhansi. And while he was in Jhansi, focusing on trying to open his business, Bharati Bhavan, his business in Allahabad collapsed. So let's read a little bit of that. Now, as the collapse of Ahmedabad business, his past life was seeming further and further behind him each day. But one day, after he had been in Jhansi about 6 months, a telegram arrived, bringing a startling reminder of his past connections. His business in Allahabad had been burglarized. His servants had lost all his money and medicine and anything else of value. Servants had not lost, sorry, servants had stolen. His servants had stolen all his money and medicine and anything else of value. It had been a loss of 7,000 rupees. That's a little less than $100 of today, but much more valuable in those times. It's a lot of money. Abhay read the news, laughed, and uttered the Bhagavatam verse. Yasyaham anugrinami harishyetad dhanam shanai tato dhanam tejanti asya swajana dukkha dukkitam. Now, please note, this you will find this later also when Prabhupada writes a poem called Vrindavan Bhajan, where he mentions the same thing. Where have my wife and others have abandoned me? We have not yet come to that stage as yet here, but this is a theme which repeatedly occurs as Yasyam Anugranami. So if you notice here, it is said that Prabhupada laughed when his business collapsed. This is the nature of a perfected pure devotee of the Lord. He's beyond the dualities of this material world. In the material world, there's honor, dishonor, loss, gain, or victory, defeat. These are all the conceptions of duality. And these conceptions of duality are due to the consciousness of material enjoyment. It is material enjoyment which creates this concept of duality. That's why Pandita Samadarshana, he sees everyone, a dog eater, and a Brahmin, a Chandala, everybody on an elephant, everyone on the same platform. As Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, they see all of them on the same spiritual platform. So for a pure devotee, there's no such thing as material success or material failure. For them, both of them are equally, both of them are equal. So a pure devotee would laugh at success, would also laugh at failure. Prabhakar Mishra advised Abhay to go back to Allahabad to recover what he could. No, Abhay said, this is good for me. I was sad, but now one great attachment has come to an end and my life is fully surrendered and dedicated to Sri Sri Radha Madhava. Abhay's son, Vrindavan, soon arrived in Jhansi, requesting Abhay to come to Calcutta to revive the business. You know, if you recollect, Calcutta business had not stopped fully. First, Prabhupada went from, he wanted to expand his business to spread his spiritual master's mission with the money that he can generate from the business. So he had invested, he had taken a place in Lucknow for 40,000 rupees. And that Lucknow business collapsed. Then he came to Allahabad. So meanwhile, the Calcutta was going on, as you may remember. It was in the Sita Kanta Banerjee lane, but it was a small scale thing. So now that the Allahabad business also collapsed after Lucknow, so his son came to request him to revive the business in Calcutta, requesting Abai to come to Calcutta to revive the business. Abai Charan Dey and Sons. As they sat together in Abai's room at the Radha Memorial, Abai explained that he could not go back. He requested Vrindavan to stay and assist him by doing typewriting, but Vrindavan returned to Calcutta. Now, one feature of Prabhupada's life in Jhansi was that although he had established the League of Devotees with members and things like that, but there was not a single whole-time worker, as Prabhupada calls it. The whole time they would assist him part-time, especially Prabhakar Mishra, who eventually becomes his disciple. But he would help outside his Sanskrit university and medical profession. Outside of it, he would spend time helping Srila Prabhupada. But he did not have a whole-time worker. Prabhupada explains, Srila Prabhupada, that league of devotees, I was alone. There were some students, but they were not so active. I was doing everything. I wanted to organize with Prabhakar Mishra and others, but they were not interested to devote their whole time. If you asked him to do full-time work, that he would not do, but he was initiated. They were all learned scholars in Sanskrit, medical men. Prabhakar Mishra now recollects, when I first met Swamiji, he said to me, you are a Brahmana and a Prabhakar, and you're eating in a restaurant. You come with me and I will feed you myself and I shall cook. So we would prepare prasadam, and offering it to the Lord, we would take Bhagavat prasadam together. In this way, by his mercy, I got the chance to take prasadam. He also said to me, you become Keshaheen. Kesha means hair, heen means without hair, which means shaven. So I went with shaven head to the college where I taught, and everyone laughed at me. When I told Swamiji the situation, he said, since you are a medical officer, you can grow out your hair. When I took Diksha, Swamiji gave me my name, Acharya Prabhakar. My original name was Prabhakar Mishra. So he said, you don't write the Mishra, you are Acharya Prabhakar. He gave me the name and offered me a Tulsi Mala and put tilak on my forehead and tied a Kanti Mala around my neck. He had registered the foundation of the League of Devotees, and he appointed me as his secretary for preaching throughout the world. We used to go to the villages for Sankirtan and Bhagavad Katha continuously. Now, that's what Prabhupada would do, that he would take Prabhakar Mishra with him and travel from village to village, and he would do kirtans, give talks, and arrange for prasadam distribution. So this was what Prabhupada would do along with Prabhakar Mishra. He was practically a lone man, Srila Prabhupada, but he had some assistance from Acharya Prabhakar. So now you can imagine, Prabhupada is preaching in a place like Jhansi. Even today in India, Jhansi is not a very prominent place. He's preaching in a small place called Jhansi. But nevertheless, even in Jhansi, while preaching, he's thinking of a worldwide society of devotees. So he was local in his preaching, but his outlook always remained global. While preaching locally, Abai was simultaneously working to give an international scope to his League of Devotees. He wrote to government agencies asking them to help him expand his genuine educational project. And he also tried to recruit preachers from amongst his friends. He wrote to his old college classmate, Rupen Mitra in Calcutta, inviting him to join in worldwide missionary activities. My mission desires to train up 40 trainees, and I have asked help from the government for this useful educational purpose. I want that you may be one of the trainees in this regard, and you can ask Kartik Dada to join us in this spirit. You will know from the papers sent to you how we live and what we do, and thus you can make up your mind whether it is possible for you to join us. The first thing is that we want to train up some retired men in the Vanaprastha life and some young men in the Brahmacharya life. I have no inclination for the sannyas life, which is rather a difficult job for the fallen people of this age. The so-called sannyasis in red garments have spoiled the good name of such order of life. Abai also asked Rupen, kindly let me know the charges of this advertisement in English and vernacular papers of Calcutta. The following was the advertisement. Educational. Wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves. Now the advertising in India, but look at Prabhupada, he's maintaining that focus. Wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply. A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, Bharati Bhavan, Post Jhansi, Uttar Pradesh. Now, notice that this is same thing that Prabhupada tried to establish when he established Krishna consciousness movement, when he established the Krishna consciousness movement in the West. He wanted to train the members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness to come to the platform of goodness. That's why in the beginning, the very first verse of the Nectar of Instruction, Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Prabhupada says it is the business of all members of the Krishna consciousness movement to become Goswamis. And that particular verse is referring to Grihasthas. That it's not that the Goswami title is applicable only to the renounced order of men, it is applicable even for the Grihasthas. And Srila Prabhupada expects all of us to become Goswamis. What does a Goswami means? One who is controlled, one who is able to tolerate the urges of the senses. And one cannot tolerate the urges of the senses unless one is situated on the platform of goodness. Because on the platform of goodness, there is no hankering and lamentation. Hankering is a sign of the mode of passion, and lamentation is a sign of the mode of ignorance. When there is no hankering and lamentation, then one is situated in the mode of goodness. And that is the Brahmical platform, and that is the platform of the Goswamis, and that is the platform where one can tolerate the urges of the mind, the urge to speak, and the urges of the body. Okay. Bharati Bhavan's ownership trouble begins. I wrote Bharati Bhavan, it's Bharati Bhavan. Okay. What kind of trouble began? Because initially, if you remember, Mr. Bhayar who was the manager of that place, he had offered the Bharati Bhavan as a gift to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada followed up with him to execute the gift deed. Gift deed is a legal ownership. Gift deed confers legal ownership to Srila Prabhupada, or confers legal ownership to the League of Devotees. So Prabhupada wanted the gift deed to be executed. And initially, Mr. Bayar said that Prabhupada would have to pay 500 rupees. Now, when the Allahabad business collapsed, he lost 7,000 rupees along with that collapse of the Allahabad business. And because of that collapse of the Allahabad business, and also apart from that, he had also spent about 3,000 rupees in the opening of the League of Devotees. So even 500 rupees became difficult for Srila Prabhupada to pay. And Acharya Prabhakar was, although he was a medical man and he was a Sanskrit teacher, nevertheless, he was being subsidized by his parents. He also had very little money. So even 500 rupees became difficult to execute the gift deed. And but soon after that, instead of 500 rupees, Bharti Bhavan's manager, Bayal, began to ask for 5,000 rupees. So originally, what started off as a gift deed now was becoming complicated. That they were asking for 5,000 rupees to get the ownership of the property. So if Prabhupada had to pay even 500 rupees, what to speak of 5,000 rupees, he would have to get some money. And definitely, he's not going to be able to do that in Jhansi. So Srila Prabhupada returned to Calcutta with the hope of trying to see if any possibility exists about him being able to raise money to pay for the gift deed. So Prabhupada goes back to Calcutta. That's where his family life completely collapses. So he goes back to Calcutta. When he arrived in Calcutta in the spring of 1954, he was without money. He chose to live with his godbrothers at the Gaudiya Sangha in Chetla. If you remember, Prabhupada had originally was in Sitakanta Banerjee Lane, and when the Lucknow business collapsed and Prabhupada moved to Allahabad, his family, because of the difficulties of maintenance, they had moved to his father-in-law's place. His wife had moved to her father's place. And when Prabhupada came, you may recollect that she offered him food bought from a restaurant. And Prabhupada thought that his wife was going to get spoiled if she stays in her father's house. So they moved to another place called Chetla Street. So here it says, when Prabhupada went back to Calcutta, he chose to live with his godbrothers at the Gaudiya Sangha in Chetla, the same neighborhood his family lived in. Since he had no money, the head of the ashram bore his expenses. Abai gave daily discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam, which the Gaudiya Sangha brahmacharis highly appreciated. Krishna Kumar Brahmachari recollects, even after he left, his sweet melodious voice would ring in my ears. He used to often express a desire to go abroad and preach. So he maintained that flame, flame of desire to go abroad and preach and execute the mission of his spiritual master. Just a sec. Just give me 1 second. It's a bit cold. One of his sons was running a small business, Vimaltone Laboratory, that Abhay Charan Day and Sons had become Vimaltone Laboratory, and thus supporting the family. Abhay knew that his wife would not be interested in his work in Jhansi. His son had been there, but had not been impressed. Vrindavan Day, if you remember, he came to Jhansi and he just left. Prabhupada asked him to stay back in Jhansi and help him, but he left. His son had been there, but had not been impressed. The family would see his preaching in Jhansi as a threat to their family life. Abhay, however, was sustaining himself by his vision, which was now taking practical shape, of a world reformed by Krishna consciousness. He even thought of opening a branch of the League of Devotees in Calcutta. But inevitably, he was plunged again into family responsibilities. Some of his children were still unmarried. Rent and bills had to be paid. Even if he were to develop the Vimaltone Laboratory, the family would demand whatever he earned. And even if he were to accede to their demands, live at home and give up preaching, the greatest difficulty would still remain. They weren't serious about devotional service, nor could he change them. What is the use of conducting a business if they would not be devotees? He visited his family and the same old scene occurred. Local friends came to visit and Abai began preaching, giving Bhagavad Gita classes just as he had been doing in Jhansi. Meanwhile, his wife and rest of the family would take tea in a separate room. Srila Prabhupada recollects, I wanted as much as possible to get her to work with me in spreading Krishna consciousness, to get her help. But she was very determined. She wouldn't help me in spreading Krishna consciousness. So finally, after many years, I could understand she would not be any assistance to me. She was very attached to drinking tea. I was always telling her not to drink tea because I wanted to have a nice Vaishnava family. So although I was repeatedly telling her, this time I finally said, you have to choose between me or tea. Either the tea goes or I go. In this way, I was even criticizing my own family. But because they were thinking I was the husband, she was thinking he's the husband, and children were thinking, or father, children were thinking he's the father. They couldn't take my instruction seriously. So she replied, give up tea drinking or give up my husband? Well, I will have to give up my husband then. Of course, she thought I was joking. One day, Radharani made a great mistake. There is a system of barter in which a customer would place on a scale an object a shopkeeper considered valuable, and the shopkeeper would then balance it with an equal weight of merchandise. So while Abhay was out, his wife took his worshipable Bhagavatam to the market and traded it for tea biscuits. When Abhay came home and looked for the book, she told him what had happened. She hadn't taken the matter as a very serious thing. She was out of tea biscuits. But Abhay was shocked. At first, he felt depressed, but then a wave of absolute resolution passed over him. His family life was finished. When he told them he was leaving, they didn't understand what he meant. He had been leaving for 30 years because he would travel on business. That's what is being spoken here, is being written here. He was always coming and going. When he walked out the door, they thought, there he goes again, he's leaving. It was the usual routine. Everyone could see, even the neighbors, Mr. Day was going again. He had been at home, now he was going, he would be back again. But Abhay knew he would never come back. Srila Prabhupada, before leaving my family, I wanted to get all my sons and daughters married, but some of them disagreed. But then the time is up. Never mind whether they are married or not. Let them see to their own business. Suppose I die immediately, who will take care of my daughter? At that time we say God will take care. Then why not now? God will take care. My Guru Maharaj used to say that renunciation of family life was civil suicide. If you commit suicide, that is criminal. But that renunciation of family is voluntarily committing suicide. Now I am dead. Whatever you like, you do. Krishna says, Krishna says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, give up all religion.
We want to hear Jinka's class.
Krishna says, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, give up all religion. So family is Griha Dharma, the religion of the family. But Krishna says, give that up. But that attachment is there. And if we say that feeling of attachment has to be given up gradually, then that we cannot do because the attachment is there. But if God will take care of them if I die immediately, then why not now? His spiritual emotions were so turbulent that he wasn't thinking of going to Jhansi. He wanted to take a train to anywhere. Then he remembered some old godbrother friends who were living in an ashram in Jharkhand, only a short train ride south of Calcutta. So he borrowed 10 rupees from a friend and bought a ticket to Jharkhand. It was a small matha. When Abhay arrived, he was welcomed by Paramahamsa Maharaj, Damodar Maharaj, and others. When Abhay arrived, he was welcomed by Paramahamsa Maharaj, Damodar Maharaj, and others. Paramahamsa Maharaj had been present when Abhay had first met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and he remembered Abhay as he had looked then, dressed in white khadi, looking like a Gandhian anarchist. Abhay explained to him, I couldn't fulfill my family's needs, so now let me preach the message of Lord Caitanya. Abhay told him how his business had failed and how he had willingly left his family and was now destitute. Paramahamsa Maharaj, when Abhay arrived, he appeared very poor, starving. He had no means. He came alone to the Mata, and when he arrived, he only chanted Hare Krishna, nothing else. Abhay spent his time in Jargam, chanting the holy name and becoming settled in detachment from his family. For several days, he chanted Japa almost continuously. Paramahamsa Maharaj would lecture in the evenings, and then Abhay would also speak on Bhagavad Gita. But as time passed, his thoughts turned again to Jhansi, and he soon felt ready to go back to the League of Devotees. He had to secure the buildings and go on with preaching. But before returning, he obtained a large deity of Lord Caitanya that he planned to install at the Bharati Bhavan. Ironically, he had gone to Calcutta to do business and raise money. But now he had no money, no business, and no family responsibilities. He had been married 36 years, and now at age 58, he had fully taken to the Vanaprastha order. Now he could dedicate his life fully to preaching Krishna consciousness. The Bharati Bhavan intrigue. Now, there was a series of events which happened, due to which Prabhupada had to eventually relinquish the Bharati Bhavan, or the League of Devotees in Jhansi. It began when the wife of the governor as we study was Mr. Munshi, when the wife, who had also given a donation of 100 rupees to Prabhupada. Once Munshi's wife visited Jhansi for a sammelan, and Mrs. Munshi was a kind of a social worker. Now, if you recollect, there was a lady, Suryavanshi, also who helped Prabhupada deal with Mr. Bhayal to get the League of Devotees for the building, the Bharati Bhavan, as a gift. Now, this lady Suryavanshi, she was an educated lady, and one of the few educated ladies at that time in Jhansi. And Mrs. Munshi was a social worker who especially believed in the empowerment of women by teaching them secretarial skills and English. So when Mrs. Munshi came to Jhansi, the Suryavanshi, she met Mrs. Munshi and tried to encourage her to open a branch of that women's empowerment group. I don't recollect the name, but anyway, there is a whole initiative that she had taken up, Mrs. Munshi. So this lady Suryavanshi asked her to set up a branch of that in Jhansi because it could help all the women of Jhansi. And so with this idea in mind, she approached Mrs. Munshi, and both of them worked it out. And so when Mrs. Munshi asked what would be a suitable place to start this initiative, to conduct this, so then this Suryavanshi, she told the governor's wife that the Radha Memorial or the Bharati Bhavan is the best place, because she felt this empowerment of women is very important and only this lady could do it. And whereas Prabhupada could preach his message, this is the logic that she gave to Prabhupada, that Prabhupada could preach his message anywhere, but the women of Jhansi, they can't go anywhere and they need this empowerment. So Prabhupada could go anywhere and preach, but the women of Jhansi need this empowerment. Forget about spiritual life. So That's the mood in which she went, and she tried to talk to Prabhupada to give up the Bharati Bhavan, and move out of Jhansi, or at least move out of the Bharati Bhavan. So she tried to convince Prabhupada of the importance of it for women's empowerment, and Prabhupada said no. He explained that the Suryavamshi thing is still based on the bodily concept of life. Women, men, all these are bodily concept of life, whereas Prabhupada's mission is transcendental to all the bodily conceptions. But obviously, as expected, she could not understand the significance of it. And so she reported the matter to Mrs. Munshi. And usually people in such high government offices, or she's the wife of the governor, they don't deal directly. So what she did was that this manager of the Bharati Bhavan, Mr. Bhayal, he had a cinema house. So that license for cinemas houses have to be renewed periodically. And so there was news that if the Bharati Bhavan does not go to Mrs. Munshi, he would have trouble renewing his license. So like this, things were getting very difficult for Srila Prabhupada. And at one point in time, Mrs. Munshi even directly contacted Srila Prabhupada and said, you have not been able to pay the 5,000 rupees, so why don't you leave that place? And Prabhupada tried to explain to her about the importance of his mission, but she did not understand it. So let's look into this. Prabhupada himself summarizes what happened to Bharati Bhavan. So let's just look into that. Prabhupada's own summary. Prabhupada writes a whole summary there of his friends said that if you fight this legally, there is a good chance, because in India there is a sentiment towards religious organizations, and since the League of Devotees was a religious organization, Prabhupada would succeed eventually. But Prabhupada had seen what had happened with his godbrothers, so he was not very keen about a legal fight. So Prabhupada summarized it. So here is a summary. Short history. I came to Jhansi in October 1952. I delivered some lectures at Gita Mandir on Gandhi Jayanti Day 1952. Then he made acquaintance with Prabhakar Shastri. My idea of League of Devotees was implemented. He took me to Reva Shankar Bayal for Bharati Bhavan. Mr. Sri Reva Shankar agreed to hand over the Bharati Bhavan to League of Devotees, and he agreed to become a member of it in the presence of Prabhakar Mitraji and myself. I write letters from Allahabad to confirm. He confirmed my letter on 10/12/52. Prabhakar intimated the desire of Reva Shankar on 1/1/1953. Look at how Prabhupada is so meticulous. He really keeps track of things. Prabhakar intimated the desire of Reva Shankar on 1/1/53. I got the document needed for League of Devotees and came to Jhansi for signature of the members. Reva Shankar signed and agreed to become an executive member. The same person who is now trying to evict Prabhupada. First by charging 500, then by charging 5,000. 11. The same person who also owns the cinema house. 11. The document is submitted for registration on 4th February 1953 at Lucknow. Returned on 10th October 1953. The League of Devotees ceremoniously started on 16th May 1953 and work began. So I'm occupying the building since then and continuing my work. Abhay went on to enumerate more than 30 points, including news publicity and congratulations he had received. He listed the story of how he came here, sacrificing my business and family. I received a telegram from Allahabad instructing the news of burglary by breaking lock. I could not attend the business for work here. And it was closed subsequently at a loss of rupees 7,000. Abhay thought of turning to some of his sannyasi godbrothers for help. If he or they could purchase the buildings, his competitors would be silenced. He thought it worthwhile to interest his godbrothers in purchasing the buildings as an adjunct to their own missions. Vrindavan was not far away. A 4-hour train ride to Mathura and then a short Tanga ride. He had gone there on pilgrimage in October of 1953 and he even looked at an available room in a temple near Keshigat with the idea of staying there someday. He had also traveled there several other times since he had begun residing in Jhansi. This time he went to the Imlitala temple to see his god brother Bhaktisaranga Goswami and asked if he would like to take over the proprietorship of the Bharati Bhavan so that it might be used for preaching Krishna consciousness according to the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But Bhaktisaranga Goswami was not interested. After approaching another god brother Damodar Maharaj, who was also not interested in Jhansi, Abai took the short Tanga ride back to Mathura to see another god brother, Keshav Maharaj. Keshav Maharaj was in Mathura with a group of his disciples to establish a center, but he had not yet located a suitable place. So when Abai told him about the buildings in Jhansi, he was interested. This is the same Keshav Maharaj from whom he takes sannyas initiation later on. So when Abai told him about the buildings in Jhansi, he was interested. Abai and Keshav Maharaj composed a letter to Mr. Bayal, presenting their requests and the aims of their movement, and then traveled to Jhansi in a group, Abai and Keshav Maharaj with his disciples. Keshav Maharaj and his party stayed for several days in Jhansi, holding kirtans and lectures. They had an appointment with Reva Shankar Bhayal, but Mr. Bhayal broke it, so they had to wait to see him on another day. Meanwhile, Keshav Maharaj had time to form an opinion of Jhansi and discuss with Abai the likelihood of making this his headquarters. He noted that the people were receptive, but the location was too remote. Even before meeting with Mr. Bhayal, Keshav Maharaj felt reluctant to stake his whole mission in Jhansi. Abai agreed, aware that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said that a preacher should go into the big cities and not practice his bhajan in seclusion. And he admitted that after 2 years in Jhansi, he had made no full-time or whole-time followers. When they finally met with Mr. Bhayal failed to present clear terms for purchasing the property. He said they were eligible to buy it, but he made their use of the buildings conditional. He wanted to have a say in the nature of the programs they would hold. Abai knew that this was just a further sign of shady dealings, and he suspected that Mr. Bhayal was under mounting pressure to give the buildings over to the Mahila Samiti or the Women's Society. Keshav Maharaj, having lost all interest, decided to go back to Mathura, and he invited Abhay to join him. But Abhay remained. Mr. Bhayal wanted him out, and he even returned Abhay's deposit of 210 rupees, claiming that Abhay now had no justification for residing at the Bharati Bhavan. Abhay noted down the latest events in his short history. This is point number 29. He wrote more than 30 points. Initially, we read about 12. This is point number 29. He has also to give me a check for rupees 210 in lieu of my deposit money with him. But he has no money in the bank. The bank has returned it with remark, which means the check bounced. The money, 30, the money which is given to him was misappropriated by him for his own purpose, and now he has given a false check with an agreement with the bank. It is plain cheating to me from the beginning to the end. I must be compensated. I must be compensated for all the money before I can leave the buildings. But he saw it as the inscrutable will of Krishna. Events and opinions were turning him against conducting a mission in Jhansi. It no longer seemed auspicious. Srila Prabhupada himself recollects this. I wanted to start from there. It was a nice big house. It was not given to me rightly, but I was using it because there was no gift deed. It was given to him and he was using it. So somehow or other, she got imagination that this house is very nice. She was the governor's wife. Through collector and through government officials, she made pressure. So, of course, there were many lawyer friends. They advised me, you do not give up. But I thought, who is going to litigate? I thought that I have left my home and now I should take up litigation. No, I don't want this house. And he further recollects, if I did not leave, nobody could drive me. That is a fact. But I thought, who is going to litigate these things? It is the governor's wife, and she's pressing through collector. The manager who's in charge, he had some cinema house. So they had to renew the license, and this collector pressed him that unless you arrange for this house, we are not going to renew your license. I thought, unnecessarily, this man will be in trouble. I will have to pay many rupees, and she is the governor's wife. Srila Prabhupada is not interested in any of these entanglements. And now he was not a businessman who could afford to live wherever he wanted. And Jhansi was not a place of ashrams like Mathura or other places. So the only option left to Srila Prabhupada was to leave Jhansi. So he continued to keep in touch with Acharya Prabhakar and others, Radhelal and Mr. Mitra, Dr. Shastri, and tried to encourage them in Krishna consciousness. So when finally what happened was Prabhupada decided to leave, and he before deciding to leave, he told them to continue the work, and he told them that he will be in touch. All these personalities like Radhelal, Mr. Mitra, Dr. Shastri, and others who had helped him. Of course, Suryavamshi was the cause of him leaving. So there's no question of asking her to continue the work, because she was not interested in this work anymore. When Abai left Bharati Bhavan with a 6-foot high lettering, this is a very unique thing the Prabhupada did. 6-foot high lettering called League of Devotee on the wall. If the lettering was 6 foot, I guess the wall should have been at least about 10 feet or maybe 8 feet at least. So 6 feet is quite big, quite tall. So when Abai left the Bharati Bhavan with a 6-foot high lettering, League of Devotees, painted across the outside wall, he felt sad. It had been a natural, spontaneous success for him. The young, educated people of Jhansi had looked up to him from the start, and had it not been for the intrigue, he would have never left. But he felt he had no real choice. He had come as a family man on business and was leaving as a homeless Vanaprastha, forced to take shelter of Krishna. His plans were uncertain, but his desire was strong and his health good. So he moved on to Mathura, carrying with him the deity of Lord Caitanya. So with that ends this chapter, and we have enough time. We'll see if we can finish the next chapter also. I doubt it, but we'll go as far as we can. Before that, just give me a second. I just need to drink some water.
Prabhuji, can we ask question on this chapter now or afterwards? Haribol?
You can ask question now, but then we'll have to extend the class accordingly.
Okay.
Yeah, fine. You can ask.
Just two small questions. You read something about, what was that, renunciation of family, civil suicide. I could not understand. Can you please explain that point again?
Just like when a man is dead, right? So he has no connection with this material world. That's what it means. When someone dies, finished. All his connections with the material world are finished. So when a person takes the sannyas order, it means the equivalent of that, in the sense that all his material identity completely collapses. in the sense of he is the owner of so-and-so business, he is the husband of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. All of those designations completely collapse. So that's why it's called, it's like considered like taking, it's like voluntarily committing suicide. Suicide means you're terminating your material identity. Sannyas is the termination of one's material identity. That is why the wife is considered as a sannyas widow at that point. When the husband takes sannyas, the wife is considered as a sannyas widow, because materially, for all material purposes, the person has died, in the sense that he is no longer performing in his in the capacity of his material identity. He's completely obliterated that identity.
But you read something also like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur said it's not good or something like that?
No, that Prabhupada himself says it. Prabhupada himself says that he was thinking that in this age it's difficult, it's not good. The Prabhupada himself says it, right? Okay, 1 minute. That I'll just come to that one. Just give me a second. Prabhupada himself says it.
I think it went below, just a little below. No, below. No, you're going above.
Okay.
Go down, I think. And then it must be in collapse of this, right? Yeah, somewhere here probably. Yeah, if you commit suicide, that you're criminal. At the bottom of the page, bottom of the previous page.
This thing about Prabhupada, about sannyas, it comes much earlier. It comes much earlier. This is about this suicide, but the other one comes earlier.
Okay.
Just give me a second. Just look at the Prabhupada spoke.
It's here only, means when he is talking to his friends in Calcutta, just before this page, when he is talking to Kartik Dada and others, just go above, Prabhuji. Yeah, just little before. It's written here that I have no inclination for sannyas life.
Yeah, okay, correct. Yeah. So when he writes to his friend Rupen Mitra in Calcutta, that's correct. Because of the fact that here it is, I'm just showing the pointer here. I have no inclination for the sannyas life, which is rather a difficult job for the fallen people of this age. The so-called sannyas in red garments has spoiled the name of such order of life. No, that is because it is a difficult job for the people of this fallen people of this age. So Prabhupada did not consider himself to be qualified enough for that. That's just Prabhupada's humility. So apart from that, he also speaks about so-called sannyasis in red garments has spoiled the good name of such order of life. Anyway,
the word civil suicide appeared somewhere, right?
That comes later. That's where
okay.
I just said.
Okay.
That's called civil suicide. I mean, that's where we originally here it is.
Yeah.
If you commit suicide, that is criminal, but renunciation of family is voluntarily commit suicide. No, I'm dead, whatever you like, you do. This place.
Second point I wanted to check with you, Prabhuji. I heard that devotees were trying to buy over that League of Devotees building. Any idea if they were successful or ISKCON has obtained it?
I also heard it a long time ago. I haven't followed it up since. Now that you brought it up, I'll try to see what happened with it. Yes, I also remember. Okay. Some years ago, right?
Couple of years ago, probably.
I mean, definitely it's not successful because I didn't see it anywhere in ISKCON news but I can try to find out what is the status of it.
Okay. That's it, Prabhuji. I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else has any questions on this section that we read so far?
Thank you, Krishna Prabhuji. Yes, I have a question, a quick one. So this is going back to the same question about the civil suicide. So Srila Prabhupada is at this stage taken Vanaprastha, not sannyas. So why is vanaprastha compared to civil suicide? Because that in real terms, you're not required to give up family at vanaprastha.
No, but here Prabhupada, I mean, already he is making up his mind. So that Vanaprastha was earlier, right? So that particular point where he's writing Rupen Mantra was earlier. But here, when he's leaving his family, here in this particular, this much later, not much later, whatever you call it. It's a later incident after what happens with his wife, not before that. Before that, he was talking about Vanaprastha. But after his wife traded the Bhagavatam for tea biscuits, then that's when he speaks about this. That what do you call it? Then now he's thinking, when he's talking here, he's that, I mean, typically referring here to sannyas. Renunciation of family is sannyas. So this is referring to sannyas. So by now, Prabhupada is making up his mind to take up sannyas. That's eventually he'll do it also. So when the family itself had rejected him, what more is left actually? But when Vanaprastha means that you're still connected to your family, but you're not, you're focusing on spiritual activities. So that is until he came back to Calcutta. And once he came back to Calcutta, this is what happened. His wife traded the Bhagavatam for tea biscuits. And that's when he decided, okay, enough of this.
So in his mind at that point, he was ready for sannyas. He was
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Now he's ready. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Vishnu Vandana Mataji.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhuji, that's now. Just about the children of Prabhupada, Prabhuji. So Prabhupada, all his, I know, like the 3 sons and 1 daughter, has never appreciated the Prabhupada's work and have never supported, after he become even successful also, Prabhuji, they were never been.
No. The last son was favorable. The first son filed a case saying that all the properties of ISKCON belong to them because, they're just inheritors and all those things. That case it fell through. They did not succeed in the court. But the last son was very favorable towards ISKCON. And his granddaughter, Prabhupada's granddaughter, that means his daughter, was initiated disciple of His Holiness Jayapatak Maharaj, and she was married to Sujitendriya Prabhu of Mayapur. Unfortunately, she left her body in the 2006 floods. They were going to Calcutta, and so the boat capsized, and she and her younger daughter, they left their body. And Prabhu and their elder daughter are still in Mayapur. So yes, the last son was favorable. He was not practicing, but his daughter took to Krishna consciousness. She was also initiated.
Okay. And what was his name, Prabhuji? The last son?
I think his name wasn't it Vrindavan Chandrade? No. By next class, I'll let you know, Matji. If anyone here knows, I've seen him, I've met him, I've talked to him also so many times.
Yes, Vrindavan Chandrade. Vrindavan Day.
Vrindavan Day.
Okay.
I heard he also left his body recently.
Yes, he left his body also. And one thing is that you can notice with them, like their demeanor, the way that he talks, he resembles Prabhupada. He would resemble him whenever I met him, the way he talked and things like that. Resemblance, at least external resemblance. I'm not talking in terms of spiritually.
Yeah. Okay, Prabhuji. Thanks, Prabhuji.
Action. Okay, so we'll go on to the next chapter now. This is an interesting chapter. It's called interesting in the sense that Prabhupada is using an expression here called crying alone in the wilderness. This chapter is about New Delhi, and it's titled New Delhi Crying Alone in the Wilderness. Now, how did Prabhupada go from Jhansi? We know that he went from Jhansi to Calcutta, and then then again back to Jhansi, and that's when everything closed, right? He went with Keshav Maharaj and everything closed. So now he left with him with the deity of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he went first to Mathura, and Keshav Maharaj Mutt in Mathura he went, and he had a magazine called the Gaudiya Patrika, and since Prabhupada was a prolific writer and he was a good scholar and writer, things like that. So Keshav Maharaj wanted to engage him in that service of being the editor of the Gaudiya Patrika. That's one thing. So he went to Mathura and he started work on that with his godbrother. And as soon as he started that, another godbrother of Prabhupada, Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. So he wanted Srila Prabhupada to be the editor of the Sajjana Toshni, the harmonist, So he had what's called the Gaudiya Sangha in New Delhi. So he wanted Prabhupada to come there to the Gaudiya Sangha in New Delhi and take charge of the publication of this Sajjana Toshni. So then Prabhupada discussed with Keshav Maharaj, and he went to Delhi and became the editor of the Harmonist, while simultaneously he also said that by post he will also edit the Gaudiya Patrika of Keshav Maharaj. Now, when Prabhupada went to the Gaudiya Sangha in Calcutta, in Delhi, he noticed that the state of affairs there was quite bad, because Bhakti Saranga Maharaj would not live there. He was living in Calcutta, and there were a group of young people, mostly uneducated and also illiterate. They were all neophytes also. So there was a lot of quarreling in that Gaudiya Sangha. And for doing something like being the editor of a magazine and preaching and those kind of things, you need, the last thing that you want is all these petty quarreling and all these different things. But nevertheless, it was a way of life there in the Gaudiya Sangha. So meanwhile, Bhakti Saranga Maharaj requested Srila Prabhupada to take charge of that place and put things in order, like to quell the fight amongst the brahmacharis and try to bring about some order in that place. So Prabhupada tried his best, but it was a very difficult job, and the brahmacharis would still quarrel. But whatever Prabhupada could do, he did. Meanwhile, he was interested in a very, Prabhupada always thinking in terms of expanding the preaching. So the Gaudiya Sangha also did not have money to keep printing this Hamar Sajjana Toshni. So Prabhupada was very enthusiastic about, he wrote to Bhakti Saranga Maharaj that he has contacts in Delhi and businessmen and other government officers. So he could approach them and raise donations for the magazine. And the magazine usually was used to be published as 500 copies of the magazine used to be published. And Srila Prabhupada wanted to raise it to 1,000 copies, always thinking of expanding. So Bhakti Saranga Maharaj did not agree with that proposal because it involved more cost. And meanwhile, Prabhupada talked to the printers. Prabhupada was enthusiastic. He talked to the printers for the same price. Prabhupada is an expert negotiator. For the same price, he negotiated printing 1,000 copies of that. And Bhakti Saranga Maharaj is not in agreement. He said, whatever it is, still print 500. And then although Prabhupada could not understand why it only 500 printed, he had already negotiated a wonderful deal with the printer. And then apart from that, Prabhupada did not even have a typewriter there in the Gaudiya Sangha. So Prabhupada asked Bhakti Saranga Maharaj that it is very difficult to do this work without a typewriter. And then Prabhupada, Bhakti Saranga Maharaj replied that you can take the typed manuscript to the printer and they will type it out there. The typed the written document to the printer, and then the printer will type it out in their press. So Prabhupada reasoned that this is going to make the whole thing very slow. Prabhupada had that sense of urgency. Both he would have the sense of urgency, and he would also have the sense, he also had this expansive mindset to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. So somehow there was some difference of opinion. There were some difference of opinions between Srila Prabhupada and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. Now, then Prabhupada receives a letter from Bhakti Saranga Maharaj's secretary, Ramananda Prabhu. You see how the way they write. It's interesting how they write. Yes. This is a letter written by Ramananda Prabhu, the secretary to Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. With innumerable humble obeisances at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava, Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Prabhu, we received your letter written to Sri Guru Maharaj on the 5th of October 1955. Your project is very lofty and you are a well-wisher of our society. We got to know that also. Since the last 2 months, in spite of so many difficulties, the difficulties of prasadam and the misunderstanding of the devotees there, and in spite of various other difficulties, the kind of enthusiasm that you have shown, that is possible only for an elevated Vaishnava like yourself. You are a favorite Vaishnava of Srila Prabhupada. This refers to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. You are a favorite Vaishnava of Srila Prabhupada and a friend of all the special associates of Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees in Gaudiya Sangha ashram in Delhi are new and less respectful. They cannot give proper respect to an elevated personality like yourself, especially the lofty speculations that you have. Speculation means ideas, especially the lofty speculation that you have. Our society at the present circumstances has little ideas. We hope with all your qualities, very soon you will become settled independently and fulfilling the desires of Srila Prabhupada, start preaching very widely. We are suspecting that it won't be possible for an able and respectable Vaishnava like yourself to stay there long, adjusting with the illiterate and less educated devotees of the Gaudiya Sangha in Delhi. Moreover, you are the head of the editorial board of Srimad Keshav Maharaj's Vedanta Samiti's Gaudiya Patrika and Bhagavata Patrika. So if you spend much time in our ashram, then he might become annoyed. With many devotees, he is setting out to circumambulate the land of Braja. And we are sure that he will need your assistance in this parikrama. So you consider all the pros and cons, and if you do not neglect the duty as a leader of his organization, we will be pleased. Some articles have been sent for the October issue, Sajjana Toshini, and some more might be sent. We will be very much obliged if you would instruct Keshavananda Prabhu to publish the October issue, which means politely they're saying that you need not publish it, but Keshavananda Prabhu could publish. We hope that that Sri Guru Maharaj will be able to personally publish the November and December issues. We wish to transfer it to Calcutta from the month of January. Sri Guru Maharaj has become old and most of the time he has to depend on us. We are happy to know that you're trying very hard to publish the Caitanya Charitamrita in Hindi. But at the present circumstances, it won't be possible for us to invest 600 rupees from our fund in order to print that. Prabhupada, because he was in Delhi, he felt that if there's a Hindi book, it could be very helpful in the preaching. So Prabhupada is translating the Caitanya Charitamrita, and he had requested Bhakti Saranga Maharaj for a loan of 600 rupees. So he is writing here, Ramananda Prabhu, we are happy to know that you are trying very hard to publish the Caitanya Charitamrita in Hindi. But at the present circumstances, it won't be possible for us to invest 600 rupees from our fund in order to print that. Because Sri Guru Maharaj has taken up many projects in different directions now. And he has to spend a lot of money. So he can't take the responsibility of printing that book. Keshavananda Prabhu wrote that your clothes are getting torn. So buy a pair of clothes from the fund of the temple. And then if the devotees commit offenses at your lotus feet due to their short-sightedness, please forgive them. Signed, the servant of the Vaishnava, Sri Ramananda Das. Now, Prabhupada was so poor at that point when he was in the Gaudiya Sangha. Prabhupada requested money for two sets of cloth, a pair of cloth. So, because his dhotis and kurtas were getting torn, and he wrote to he informed Bhakti Saranga Maharaj that if he goes around to meet people, important people with torn dhoti and kurta, that may be counterproductive. So he requested Bhakti Saranga Maharaj to send him some money or to sanction, not send him money, to sanction that he could buy a pair of clothes from the temple fund. And so it was granted. It was not a fact that Abhay was being called for leadership in Keshav Maharaj's parikrama, although it was a good excuse for Ramananda suggesting that Abhay leave the Gaudiya Sangha. So after living as a dutiful member in the ashramas of Keshav Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, Abhay was again on his own. So first he was in League of Jhansi, the League of Devotees. Then he went to Calcutta. He renounced his family life. Then he went with Keshav Maharaj to back to the League of Devotees in Jhansi. And when he knew that there is no scope of retaining the place, he left. Then he took shelter in the institutions of first Keshav Maharaj, then Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. So now he had no business shelter. He had no League of Devotees, and neither he had shelter in the institutions of his God brothers. So then what happens is that Prabhupada is now alone in Delhi. And so he stays in different places, a few days in one place, few days. He does not have fixed residence now. He is dependent on the support of his well-wishers. So it is in this process that Prabhupada meets Narayan Das Rai Bahadur. Now, Narayan Das Rai Bahadur, some of you may know this near our Sri Radha Parthasarthi temple in Santnagar, east of Kailash. Very close to it is the Birla temple. You know, Birlas have temples. They are pious family. They have temples. They promote the cause of Vedic causes. They promote Vedic causes. So Prabhupada approached Narayan Das Rai Bahadur, who is the secretary of the Birla Mandir, and informed him that if he could be made in charge of the propaganda wing of the Gita Mandir, you know, so then he could do a lot of things. And so Prabhupada outlines his plan. And so he outlines his plan like this. I want to train up 40 educated youths to learn the science of transcendental knowledge and just prepare them for going to foreign countries for missionary work. To start immediately, that's number one. Point number two, to start immediately in English paper or revive my paper, Back to Godhead, in the style of Illustrated Weekly of India. Illustrated Weekly of India is an old publication. It's not, I don't know if it's still there in India. I don't think it's still there. It used to be color and it used to be the most popular magazine, like the Time magazine in the West. To start immediately an English paper or to revive my paper Back to Godhead in the style of Illustrated Weekly of India. to organize a Sankirtan party which shall not be only of good singers and musicians, but must also be used to practice sadhana or self-realization. Now, if you notice here, this is the same thing that Prabhupada did when he established the Krishna consciousness movement. So here you see point number 1, missionary work. First of all, educate them in Krishna consciousness and send them out to do missionary work, and to start illustrating, one of the main methods of preaching at that point, when Prabhupada conceived of books had not yet come into the picture, he conceived of preaching through publishing the Back to Godhead magazine. And then you notice, organize a Sankirtan party, because this is the Sankirtan movement. So we are known as the Hare Krishna people, which means that at all points in time, at any point in our history, devotees doing Sankirtan in the streets is an essential element of our identity. Then what happened was that the Gita Mandir, they responded by saying that something like this, what Prabhupada is envisioning, is not within the scope of their work. The directors, they responded by saying that something like this is not within the scope of their work, so they declined. So Prabhupada subsequently thought that, okay, let me use, if I cannot be the propaganda head of the Gita Mandir, then let me try to at least use the premises for the League of Devotee activities. So Prabhupada was relentless. So then he held a sammelan there, or a gathering there of prominent people, to introduce them to the work that he was doing. And a lot of prominent men, dignitaries, appeared for a meeting with Srila Prabhupada there, and they all promised help in different ways. And you know what happens after all the meetings are over? After the meeting is over, people forget about the meeting. So nothing really came out of all those things. Came out of that meeting. So then Prabhupada came up with another idea. So here it is. I'm just seeing my pointer here. Okay. Came up with another idea. He came up with an advertisement. Study the spiritual secret of Bhagavad Gita at home by correspondence and be a strong man. Correspondent, Bhagavad Gita correspondence course. Full course fee, rupees 50 only. The instruction is imparted not in the ordinary imaginative way of qualified interpretations. Ordinary imaginative way of qualified interpretations, but in the Parampara system of preceptorial succession. All questions are properly solved. Apply AC Bhaktivedanta. Students of all communities and nationalities are welcome. Notice again, students of all communities and nationalities are welcome. Prabhupada is consistently, Ekeha Kurunada is continuously focused on that point, that it is a worldwide movement. So subsequently, Prabhupada, after this, he decided to revive Back to Godhead. Now, if you notice the history of Back to Godhead, in 1944, Prabhupada released the first edition of the Back to Godhead magazine, and one more edition he released out in the same year, and then he could not continue it. Subsequently, World War started and all those things. Subsequently, 8 years later, 1952, Srila Prabhupada revived Back to Godhead, and he printed 2 copies of it. Now, again, in 1956, 4 more years later, Prabhupada tries to revive the Back to Godhead again. He had not published Back to Godhead in 4 years since 1952, but he decided to revive it. Back to Godhead was a mission worthy of his full attention, and it took all his efforts to collect the money, to collect the funds, compose the articles, see to the printing, and then distribute 1,000 copies. The money he would raise by obtaining interviews and soliciting donations. One donor and friend was Justice Bipin Chandra Mishra, a Supreme Court judge in New Delhi. Justice Mishra recollects, he used to come to me once a month. I gave him donations for his paper. It was only a 4-page magazine, but it showed his study of the subject and his earnestness and his devotion to Lord Krishna. He appeared to be a very simple man and modest, and it was pleasant to talk to him. He had a smiling demeanor. The main thing was his humility. He could talk with affection and confidence. Affection and confidence. Notice this combination. He could talk with affection and confidence. And he knew we were discussing things near to God. So every talk with him would sublimate us. I was a rather important personality at that time in religious affairs, but he would not be expected to make any contribution to the main religious life of Delhi at that time because of the language difficulty, because his aim was to reach the English educated persons, not the Hindi ones. And also because his means and his popularity were not at all established, the magazine did not have a wide appeal among these people. Other religious leaders were all well established. The only thing that impressed one and was worth noticing at that time was the simplicity of his abiding faith in God's name and his mission. Okay. Now what happens is, so he begins to, he attempts to revive the Back to God magazine, and he does revive it through the help of some donors like Bipin Chandra Mishra, whose recollection we just read now. And so once again, Prabhupada had revived the Back to God magazine. According to the Shastras, the current age of Kali Yuga would create continual degradation in society. And Abhay could see this evidenced every day in Delhi. Delhi, formerly known as Hastinapur, had been the ancient capital of King Yudhishthira, who 5,000 years before, under the patronage of Lord Krishna, had been the most opulent king in the world, and whose citizens had been fully protected and provided for. Now, after 1,000 years of foreign subjugation, India was again independent, and New Delhi was the capital. Yet, even in Abhay's relatively brief 60 years of experience, he had seen Indian culture, which in his childhood had retained much of the original purity of the Vedic age, degrade. Now he saw a society in which his countrymen were victimized by the propaganda that they could be happy in gross materialistic indulgence. The British had introduced tea, tobacco, meat, and factories. And now, even after independence, these were a part of India's new way of life. Having driven away the British, the Indians were imitating Western ways, and India's leaders were deliberately ignoring the Vedic principles of God consciousness, the very treasures India was meant to distribute to the whole world. Abhay had seen how India had abandoned a spiritual heritage and gone running after the modernization of the West. But now, where was that material advancement? Were Indians any happier in their independence than they had been in British days? To Abhay, the overpopulated city was a hell of ruffians and fools. Although thousands of poor people were employed in the burgeoning steel mills and tire factories, their living conditions had worsened. Abhay voiced his concern about these conditions in his Back to Godhead. Could the poor eat the nuts and bolts produced in the factories? So Prabhupada is generally very much against industrialization, because this is his main point. Repeatedly he brings up this point. Could the poor eat the nuts and bolts produced in the factories? What kind of economy is this? The economy should be based on agriculture, agrarian economy. That is what Prabhupada strongly believed in. Could they be nourished by cinema, television, or sex songs on the radio? The leaders were unable to see that abandoning spiritual principles had led to the very ills they officially abhorred: a decadent, rebellious youth, corruption in every area of civic life, and even economic instability and scarcity. When Abhay had been a youth in Calcutta, there had been no cinema billboards advertising lurid sexual fantasies. But now India had developed the third largest movie industry in the world, and film advertisements were all over Delhi. Beef shops and liquor shops had sprung up. The newspapers regularly ran editorials deploring the degradation of young Indian boys who teased, insulted, and affronted women on the street. Women's leagues complained about increased juvenile promiscuity and the obscene treatment of women in films and advertisements. But there were no upright brahmanas or saintly administrators to do anything about it. Abhay saw the need for a re-spiritualization of society. This is from the Bhagavata, Prabhupada's vision of re-spiritualization of society. So, Prabhupada had a very, very tough time publishing this Back to God magazine. It was intensely tough. It was not just an ordinary task. It was very, very tough. And the printer was Mr. Kumar Jain, and he recollects. This is a very interesting recollection, very beautiful recollection. And it gives us a pulse of the times that Prabhupada was in. The kind of efforts that he made, the difficulties, the determination, the focus. My first impression was that he was a nice person and straightforward. I felt pity also because of the conditions under which he would come. This is the printer again. I just wanted to, just repeat again. This is the printer with whom Prabhupada would print his Back to God magazine. I know he didn't have even 25 paisa. 25 paisa. I know he didn't have even 25 paisa. He would come all the way on foot and without any breakfast or anything. He would come in the morning to the press. And when I would ask him, Swamiji, did you have anything to eat this morning? He would say, oh no, Mr. Jain, I just came because I had to see the proofs. That's all right, I would say. I will get breakfast for you. I would call for breakfast and then he would sit and work. Imagine the good fortune of Mr. Jain. One of the greatest personalities on planet Earth. Krishna's Lord Chaitanya's commander-in-chief, confidential associate of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is in his office and he has the privilege of offering him breakfast and feeding him. This is called the outstanding kindness of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Even to an ordinary printer, of course he was pious, but nevertheless, what an opportunity to serve a great pure devotee. He would do the proofreading himself. Now he's continuing the recollection. It's a long recollection. He would do the proofreading himself. The printing was done by me, and most of the time he would like to be present when that final printing was being done. He would come in the morning around 7 and stay until he had seen all the proofs. It was a regular thing that he would come without breakfast. I would arrange for breakfast and we would sit across the table from one another for hours together. He was always talking on religious subjects only. But when we would be sitting, especially when waiting for the proofs to come, we would discuss many things. I felt that he knew quite a lot because he was a well-read person. He was more a friend than just a person coming to get things printed. He was a very simple man, straightforward in his habits, but his mission at that time was particularly to further the movement of back to God. His financial condition was very, very weak. Sometimes the printing would be difficult because he was not able to arrange for the paper. Many times I told him that if he was feeling difficulty, why was he continuing? But he said, no, it is my mission and I will always carry it on as far as possible. I tried to accommodate him to the maximum possible extent, but he was a real pauper. I only did the printing and he had to arrange for the paper. Sometimes it was delayed Although my job was printing, sometimes I would say, all right, you're so keen, I will give you the paper. But usually he would arrange for it himself. Since we only did printing, he would bring it in a rickshaw. We were not uncomfortable together. But as business would have it, if the bills were standing for a long time, then I would ask him if he could do something about it. He would say, don't worry, you can be sure that your money is coming. I never asked him where his funds were coming from because I felt that it was his personal matter. But it was embarrassing for him when he could not pay, so I never tried to embarrass him. He was concerned that if he didn't have money, how could he print the paper? And he definitely wanted to run that paper. He wanted to preach the teachings of the Gita. He thought of it as a sort of movement, that it was the only way that people in the world could find peace. His conviction was very strong. After picking up the copies from the printer, Abhay would walk around the city selling them. He would take a seat at a tea stand when someone sat beside him. Abhay would ask him to please take a copy of Back to God. He also went to the homes and offices of people who had already donated or agreed to see him. And he sought out new contacts, sometimes on recommendation, or sometimes by going uninvited wherever he could find a potential reader. When he delivered copies to regular donors, he would discuss the previous issue's philosophy with them and sometimes write articles on topics they requested. Our esteemed friend, Sri Bishan Prasad Maheshwari, one of the learned advocates of the Supreme Court, has requested us to write something on the principle of fruitive action with special reference to vice and its potency. Often donors agreed to see him, not so much out of genuine interest or affection, as out of a sense of obligation. In their traditional Hindu piety, they felt obliged to see the sadhu, take his paper, and even think well of him, but not necessarily read his newspaper. Once when Abhay was approaching a well-to-do house, the owner came onto the second floor veranda and shouted, "Go away, we don't want you here." Abhay, responding to the resistance, polite and impolite, that he met while selling Back to God, wrote an article, "No Time, a Chronic Disease of the Common Man," for the March 16 edition. When we approach some gentleman and request him to become a reader of Back to God, sometimes we reply with the words, "No time." They say that they are too busy in earning money for maintaining the body and soul together. But when we ask them what do they mean by the soul, they have nothing to reply. Dr. Meghnad Saha, a great scientist, was busily going to a meeting of the Planning Commission. Unfortunately, while going in his car on the road, he died and could not ask death to wait because he had no time at that moment. Look at the irony. He could not ask death to wait because he had no time at that moment. Dr. Ansari, the great Congress leader, while dying in a moving train on his way to home, said that he was himself a medical man and almost all his family men were so. But death is so cruel that he was dying without any medical treatment. Therefore, death has been described in the Bhagavad as the indefatigable. Death is awaiting everyone, although everybody thinks that he may not die. There is life after death. The busy man should try to know this also as to where he is going. This life is but a spot in his longer sojourn, and a sane person should not be busy with a spot only. Nobody says that the body should not be maintained, but everybody should know from Bhagavad Gita that the body is the outward dress and the soul is the real person who puts on the dress. So if the dress is taken care of only without any care of the real person, it is sheer foolishness and waste of time. Abhay was an unusual newspaper vendor. He didn't loudly hawk his newspaper on the street or sell it from a newsstand. He approached individuals quietly as they sat to drink tea, or he would call on acquaintances in their offices or places of business. Taking a copy from the stack he carried underneath his arm, he He would present what appeared to be an ordinary tabloid newspaper with bold black headlines across the front page. But what odd headlines! The lowest of mankind, philosophical problems within social awareness, sufferings of humanity, the pure consciousness of nationalism. Anyone could tell at a glance that this was no ordinary newspaper. Abai would say something to try to convince them to take it anyway before they said no time. On behalf of his spiritual master and the previous Vaishnava authorities, he was playing a role, the newspaper salesman, a smiling demeanor. Notice this very carefully, how Sasur Maharaj captures this. On behalf of his spiritual master and the previous Vaishnava authorities, he was playing a role, the newspaper salesman, a smiling demeanor, a gentlemanly invitation. No, it wasn't an ordinary newspaper, but they would find it interesting, and it cost only 6 paise. Thus, he was extending the mercy of Lord Caitanya, handing out the truths of the Vedas in the easy-to-take form of a newspaper. Imagine that, Vedas in the easy-to-take form of a newspaper. So Prabhupada had simplified it to such a beautiful extent that he could just carry it in the form of a newspaper. Now, a few things that struck me when I was preparing for the session was that here, if you notice in this, he was playing the role of a newspaper salesman. That's not a very dignified job. It reminded me that sometimes in our movement, sometimes when devotees get some service, they think it is a menial service. Why I cannot do that? That is more prestigious. All this is coming from the concept of duality, this higher, lower. Whereas in Krishna consciousness, everything is absolute. That service which is done to please Srila Prabhupada, please the spiritual master, please the Vaishnavas, that service is absolute. There is no such thing as this service is better than that service. All services are absolute. The concept of duality of higher and lower comes from our consciousness, from our material consciousness of what is enjoyment of our senses. The consciousness of enjoyment is what produces the concept of duality, of high, low, good, bad, beautiful, ugly. All these things are coming from the consciousness of enjoyment, material enjoyment. So the sign of a real Vaishnava, someone who's understands Krishna consciousness, is any service you give to that Vaishnava, immediately they'll take it up. I remember during the times that I joined the Krishna consciousness movement, I didn't join as a temple resident during my student days, but during those days, a lot of my friends joined the ashram, and when they joined the ashram, and several of them were highly educated people, with master's degrees and so many other things, well-decorated people, well-decorated materially with degrees. But for the first 6 months in the temple, in fact, for 1 year, in fact, at least for the first 6 months, the only service they could do was hear Bhagavatam and clean the toilets and the temple. So that was the training that they were given, because the idea was to make people understand that material education is not a big thing. All services for the Lord are absolute. Even Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, I don't know if you've already encountered that in the Ray of Vishnu course. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when some very dignified gentleman would come and ask him, from a distinguished government officer, IS officer, when they would come and ask him, is there some service that we could do? And he would say, yes, you can go and wash the pots. So that way, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would try to emphasize the absoluteness of seva to Krishna. So Prabhupada was very fixed. He didn't care about his living conditions. He didn't care about anything. He was completely focused on the mission of his spiritual master. He was completely focused on the Ekeha Kurunandana. And it is quite amazing. The hairs on my body stand on end each time I read this Kumar Jain's testimony, or Kumar Jain's recollection. How wonderful an opportunity he had to feed Prabhupada every day, and even sponsor the printing, and the hours of discussion that Prabhupada had with him. This is extraordinary mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. And if there are any questions or comments.
Prabhuji, one small question. While he
Yes,
was
sir.
getting this back to God printed, where was he staying exactly?
In different places. He never had a fixed residence.
So this was not, he was not in Chippiwada then, that time.
No, not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Chippiwada, he gets, after he goes to Vrindavan, settles down Vrindavan, then he goes from Vrindavan to Delhi, right? That is when he gets Chippiwada. That comes at a later point in the pastimes, not at this stage. Yeah.
And the other thing I heard that I'm not very sure, I just want to check with you. It appears that some ISKCON devotees were able to manage to get in touch with that Kumar Jain's son. And they apparently got some information on Prabhupada from him. Do you have an idea about that?
I haven't heard it. I'd be interested if you know any material or anyone in this group, they have seen some material about it. Please send it on the group so we can. I've not heard of this before. Two participants have raised their hand. Shailesh Govindya Prabhu and Vishnu Vandana. First, Shailesh Govindya Prabhu raised his hand. Go ahead, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. If you can just give me 1 second, I'm just taking offerings. I'm sorry, I was listening. I'm doing service. Just give me. If you take the other question first, I'll come back.
Okay, Vishnu Vandana Mataji. Go ahead with your question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dhanasram.
Yes,
So I just wanted to know, at this point of time where Prabhupada was printing Godhead magazine, right, Prabhuji? So at this point of time, Prabhupada hasn't thought about fighting Bhagavatam. So his mission is, of course,
no,
he
hasn't started about it. Because see, first of all, he was thinking of translating the Caitanya Charitamrita and printing it in Hindi. That's why he asks his god brother Bhakti Saranga Maharaj to give him a loan of 600 rupees. Because he felt that for the Hindi-speaking audience, it'll be good to establish a rapport with them, educate them in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But at this point, no. That comes at a later stage where we'll see a military officer in a tea stall. Now, one interesting thing, if you notice here, probably he was not like a usual newspaper vendor, loudly hawking his newspaper on the street or from a newsstand, but he would individually approach individuals quietly. So later on, we'll notice that when it comes a little later, that when he approaches a military officer, he is the one who tells him that why don't you print books? Because newspapers, these kind of magazines, people throw away in the dustbin. And then Prabhupada says, that was my spiritual master who instructed me through this office. We'll come to that a little later. He has not come up with a plan of Bhagavatam as yet.
Okay, Prabhuji. And is the Godhead magazine still printed, Prabhuji? No or yes?
Pardon?
This is Godhead magazine is printed, is getting printed or stopped?
Godhead is very much available. Both international edition, Indian edition is available. But it's now a bi-monthly magazine. It's not a monthly magazine. It's a bi-monthly magazine. So 6 issues in a year.
Okay, and it is published by every individual ISKCON center, probably.
No. There's the international edition, and there can be other editions depending on the countries. Like India has got an Indian edition also, but there's an international edition. There's also an international e-edition, as far as I know. I get the physical copy, so I'm not really bothered about the international edition. The e-edition. I'll let you know about the e-edition.
Okay, Prabhuji. And do we have to subscribe for the physical edition, Prabhuji? Or
physical edition also
it's like through postal or?
Yeah. But what is it here? Living in Mayapur is not difficult to get an international edition here.
Yeah. Because I never seen any of the ISKCON temple where the local temple, probably that's why, because they print their own local edition, but that's not what had.
At least I'll try to get you a link for the e-edition. By next class, I'll definitely do it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much.
Can you just put a reminder in the thing that in the in the Telegram group so that I don't forget?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Prabhuji, I couldn't talk earlier.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So it wasn't a question. I just wanted to show appreciation, Prabhuji, of how profoundly affected I am by listening to the detail of Prabhupada. We have, of course, all heard and listened to and seen plays and films and everything else, Prabhupada, but going through at this level of detail and understanding Prabhupada's journey, this level of detail is just, it's just really quite moving. To see his determination with every single stage of his life. He's just so single-mindedly focused about his Guru Maharaj's instructions. It's very profound. It's profoundly instructive. So I just wanted to say that a few words of appreciation for putting this course on to the Mayapur Institute. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, I mean, I would recommend that devotees please read themselves, because there is even finer detail than this. But since we're doing a course, I can't get into every single detail, but wherever possible, I'm trying to summarize it. Wherever I feel that, no, this cannot be summarized, this needs to be presented as it is, then I try to present it as it is. The intrigues, the relationship Prabhupada had with Bhaktisaranga Goswami, that goes on for quite some pages in the book, which that letter was a good summary of it. So I just used that as the summary, and I summarized it orally also a little bit. So I would request all the attendees in the course to kindly read through the Leelamritam. So reading along with hearing makes a big difference. Yes, Madhuri. Leela Madhuri, Lalita Madhuri.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for the wonderful session again. This is my personal experience. Would like to share that though we are reading Prabhupada Leelamrita on our own, it is good to hear when somebody else is reading loudly. This is what I experienced all these days. My question is, one question is, you were talking at the end of the session that some brahmacharis were getting trained by doing the menial services. So how to develop that mode while practicing Krishna conscious? This is one thing. And the one more thing is, as I requested last session, so if it is possible, could you please explain some more practical application from the session which you have taken today?
Yeah, see, one way to, thank you. So one way to get rid of the concept of duality is to voluntarily do it. Like, for example, those brahmacharis who were joining the temple, they could not, they had no other choice but do it by force, right? So I remember we had the opportunity, those of us who were students, not join the ashram, we would also ask to do it. But we would do it every weekend, you know, when we would go to the temple. We would have to do menial service, but not on a daily basis. So I remember that when I came to live in Mayapur, one of the first things that I did with both Vidwan Gauranga Prabhu and I spoke to Vidwan Gauranga Prabhu and said, why don't we go and clean the Bhajan Kutir every day night? You know, because they use a broom and a mop and they clean the Bhajan Kutir every day night. And we started going. But the most funniest thing there was, I mean, it is very interesting that devotees started coming and asking us what happened. Because normally in Mayapur, I mean, Rudradeep Nimai Prabhu sitting here is laughing, because normally in Mayapur, the menial service is given as a punishment. If you've done something wrong, then the departments give you that service as punishment, you know. But we had taken it up voluntarily, and these people are all very surprised. What happened? What are you all doing? You know. So then we said we like to do it, so we're doing it. And I don't know how many of them believed it or what happened. But the reason that we did it was simply because of the fact that it is important for us in our journey in Krishna consciousness to realize that all services are absolute. You know, so it's not that what do you call it? It's not that. I mean, okay, this one service, okay, Prabhupada did say book distribution is very important. That does not mean that other services are less important, because that's Prabhupada's fundamental teaching, that all services are important. So whenever we get an opportunity to do some menial service, we should grab it and try to do it, because the more we come to that platform of doing any kind of service to Krishna, the more we get free from the concepts and difficulties of dualities in this material world. So a few things that I wanted to mention is that one thing in this class, the practical application is that if you notice, no matter what circumstances Prabhupada wasn't, he does not give an excuse for not doing what he's supposed to do. In all circumstances that we observe here, Prabhupada continues to do what he's supposed to do. That should be a very important lesson for all of us, that despite whatever circumstances that we are in, we should continue to do what we are supposed to do. And I just want to mention something, because I don't know if I mentioned this in this class or not, but there in 2016, when His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj was in the ICU, he had an emergency. I remember from the ICU, he told me that he wants to attend the GBC meeting. So he asked me to go to Mayapur and connect him from the GBC room onto that, from into his ICU ward. And we did it. And I remember some of the GBC members were shocked, saying that, I mean, he's attending a meeting with all the tubes and all these different things. And recently also, you may know that he's going through a health crisis, and he's admitted in a hospital in Chennai. He had to be taken by an air ambulance. And we are on Sunday today, and Wednesdays is the GBC meeting, and he was pretty tired and drained and all that. But the doctor said, the devotee doctor on duty, he said that exactly at 4 o'clock or 4:30, Guru Maharaj woke up and said, I won't attend the GBC meeting, it's at 5 o'clock. So he's pretty new to the service, and he's a very young devotee. He's pretty new, and he had no clue in the world how Guru Maharaj is going to attend a meeting, being in the ICU and all that. So finally he did attend the meeting. He said, bring the phone, keep it near my ears, and I mean, whatever. So the point that I'm trying to make is that that's a characteristic of devotional service, that it is uninterrupted, which means that material circumstances are not supposed to interrupt it. At least, okay, sometimes what do you do? But at least it should not be voluntary interruption. Involuntary interruptions, what can you do? But it should not be voluntary. If you can do it somehow, you should do it. That should be the spirit of performing devotional service. So no matter what the circumstances were, of course, being in an ICU is an excruciating material circumstances. Compared to that, this, whatever we have studied today, may not be that excruciating, but nevertheless, it is relatively overwhelming for a lot of us. Nevertheless, it is definitely overwhelming for a lot of us. So we can get inspiration from the fact, see how one has to carry out the instruction of the spiritual master. Like here, Prabhupada is very focused. His Guru Maharaj said it, so no matter what external circumstances are there, he goes on with his mission. Is it okay, Mataji? Leela Madhuri Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu. Can I ask one more question, Prabhu? Just an information from you.
Sure.
You said that Prabhupada's granddaughter got married by the disciple of His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj.
Yeah.
Is it the one who is giving Bengali translation during Saturday classes?
Yes, Jayapataka Maharaj Saturday classes. Yes, he's the one. Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm.
Yes, ma'am.
And thank you, Prabhu, for all your explanations. Hare Krishna.
Indulekha Kripa Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji. It was a nice class. I have just one small clarification. Now, before, what used to happen is when they join and all, they used to do this menial service and all in the temples. But nowadays we can see in many temples, for menial services, they are hiring the people, outside people, ladies or men and all, to clean the toilets or clean the areas of the temple or all those things. So for payment and all they are doing. Is it I just wanted to know if I think it was much better before that we will learn the humility during that time about how this one we should be very humble in our service and all. But that experience is not there nowadays, I feel. So I want to just know about it, why and how it has happened like that.
This is a very good point, Mataji. I really appreciate that you brought this up. Yes. I strongly believe that we should continue to have that. But what happens is that as the movement grows, so unless we have let's say for example, a temple, as it expands and the number of devotees keep increasing, who come to the temple, Okay. We also need to have that many resident devotees to cater. Like suppose you build a big temple, you need to also have that many number of devotees to cater. Sorry, not cater, to attend to these kind of work, to this kind of services. If you don't have that kind of manpower, what can you do? But still, Prabhupada's direction was to build big temples so that people be attracted. So we cannot wait for that. We cannot compromise on that. We should do that. At the same time, to the best of our ability. Like if we are able to recruit so many people into the service, that's fine. Like for example, in the Gurudwara, in Golden Temple, it is the volunteers who make those food and then feed everyone, right? So they have a very interesting system there. So these are things which we can do. We need to look out for. Prabhupada is very impressed with that Golden Temple. He really was impressed with the way they were doing it. You know. So Prabhupada is like a Saragrahi. Whatever he found was very effective anywhere, he would really go for it. You know. So he wanted things like that to be done in ISKCON also. Very clearly he mentions it. So it depends on the advancement and the ability to organize in the leader. If the leader is very Krishna conscious and he has nice abilities to organize, then he'll be able to do it very well. That's why when Prabhupada is asked, how do you think this movement will go on after I'm gone? No, sorry, Prabhupada asked Giriraj Maharaj. You know, that, because normally that's the